let the sheNEDigans begin. Long live the sheNEDigans. Hello and welcome to the topic of this video. As always, let's talk some sheNEDigans. So today's video is going to be based on, well, horror, because it is Friday, and I know there's supposed to be a Valley of Death coming out today, but unfortunately I'm a little bit behind. There's just been a lot of stuff happening, but I promise you next week we will have a brand new spanking Valley of Death coming out. So for right now, you're getting this one. So, as you guys know, obviously, I love horror. Horror is arguably my favorite genre. I mean, there's a lot of elements I love about it, and one of those things are the characters. There are an incredible amount of horror characters who are incredibly iconic through film history, pop culture, you know, just that whole big shebang. There are, like I said, just a ton of really, really great horror characters. So I figured, how about in this video I talk about my favorite ones. Unfortunately, I have so many favorite horror characters, and some of them I have them, like equal to, and stuff like that. So this was a very hard list for me to make, and I assure you my opinion will probably change after this video to a certain degree, but for right now, these are the horror characters that actually do really stand out to me, and I really like them for, well, the reasons I will mention. So let's go ahead and get things started, shall we? The Nun, a more recent addition to, well, horror icons. The Nun started her scaring career in The Conjuring 2. And eventually she did get her own spin-off movie, The Nun. And I have to say, I really like her mainly because of her appearance and her, well, honestly, some of her scares in The Conjuring 2 and in The Nun. I think she is a very well made scary character. She doesn't have a lot of depth. She's not you can't really do like a whole character study on or anything on her. She's a demon, for goodness sake. So, and that's why she's all the way high up on the list, only because, well, she's a good, scary character, and I find her very intriguing, and I actually kind of like her movie, The Nun, to a certain degree. I especially really like her in The Conjuring 2, but that's why she's very high on the list. Not necessarily a great, character or anything like that, but I think as a monster, or in this case, a demon, she does an incredibly good job, well, at her job. Freddy Krueger. I know some people might not like that he's so high on the list, but honestly, I do like Freddy Krueger as a character. I think he's very interesting as a villain, as a monster. He's not in depth or anything like that. He's very straightforward. He was a child killer, and eventually the parents caught up to him, killed him, and now he haunts children in their dreams and tries to kill them in their dreams. Very, very simple, kind of. But I have to say, the reason why I really like him is because of the actor who plays him, Robert Englund. Robert Englund did a really fantastic job on just making this character iconic with, honestly, how scary he could be, with a lot of the jokes that he does, say throughout the franchise and stuff like that. He's a wisecracking ghoul and whatnot, and he can be really funny. He's a really great villain, but as we go further down the list, the reason why he's so high is because he's a character you can't identify with, which, that's fine. You're not really supposed to identify with horror characters, but in this case, this is a villain that I want to see defeated. And I mean, when I was watching Freddy vs. Jason, I always rooted for Jason, just because out of the two, Freddy was more of the villain than Jason was in many regards. So, yeah, I love Freddy Krueger. I love Robert Englund, who plays him. He's just a little bit higher on the list. Not my favorite, but he's certainly a good horror villain. The Fly. I know I'm going a little bit more obscure here with my horror characters. I particularly really love The Fly because, similarly to another horror character, which I'll kind of get to a little bit later in the list, The Fly is a really great example of science going too far, or just not being properly, well, prepared for whatever comes down your way when it comes to the field of science. There's a lot really going on in this movie that it's really great to analyze and whatnot, but the character of the Fly, he's very tragic. Whether or not you go with the original 1958 film, or if you go with the Jeff Goldblum remake, both characters are very tragic. They are good people, and unfortunately the science just gets a hold of them, and then they wind up turning into horrible monsters. And even in the end, as they're turning into these horrible abominations because they accidentally turn into the Fly by going through a transporter with a fly, and then the molecules get all mixed up, and then, they just turn to horrific monsters. They are still human, and they're still trying to cling on to that humanity as as they continue to turn into these monsters and lose their minds. It's very, very interesting, and as I said, like, out of a lot of the characters on this list, the Fly is honestly one of the more tragic out of all of them. Dracula. I know, another great horror icon, a little bit high up on the list, but I assure you it's for a few reasons. To start things off, I really, really love Dracula. And one of the great things I love about him is the many different actors who have portrayed him. And you get, like, lots of different kind of portrayals on the character of Dracula. The two most famous I would argue would be Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee. And then you eventually get, Gary Oldman. And I do have a soft spot for Gerard Butler. And honestly, I think another underrated one would be Luke Evans. A more tragic version of the character, but still, I still think he was a pretty good Dracula. That's a movie eventually I'll have to talk about in Valley of Death, but yeah, so that's the great thing about Dracula, though. You get a lot of these different performances, and although some of them are very much the same and consistent with the actual character of Dracula, there's a lot of different ways that these actors have portrayed him. And that's kind of one reason why I really like him. The two that I'll probably focus on more so are Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee. I think that these two are the best examples of Dracula. They are the ones who really set the staple of the sexy vampire, the intense stare, the accent, and all that kind of stuff. Well, more so with Bela Lugosi than Christopher Lee on the accent part. But still, both are incredible actors who have portrayed him. The only reason why he's a little high on the list is because, well, his motivations are honestly very two-dimensional, at least in my opinion. I mean, he's just a monster, he's just trying to live, he hates God, and he's, all that kind of stuff, and, he's always out for blood. In that regard, I do like him as a classic monster. I think he has a lot of good, at least original scare value to him. But in many regards, although I love him, I do think that he is a little bit underwhelming to some degree compared to some of the other monsters. Michael Myers, the epitome of evil. Honestly, that's kind of one of the reasons why he's a little bit higher than some of the other characters. One, I personally think he's actually the scariest, not out of all the people on this list, but I do think that he's honestly the scariest when it comes to all the original slasher characters, like Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, Ghostface, Chucky, any of them. I think that Michael Myers is the scarier out of all of them. He's also a very intriguing character, very similar kind of to the Nun. He doesn't really have a lot of depth, he's simply just evil. But that's kind of what makes him a little bit more interesting than, well, someone, let's say, than the Nun. Because, the Nun is just a demon. Michael Myers is an actual human. He started killing as a little boy, well, just because. And there was no motivation. It's just because he just did it, just because there is no reason, and that's the thing that makes him terrifying. He just killed because he just killed. There was no rhyme or reason. I know, like, some movies tried to give some explanation, which kind of removed a lot of the mystery of the character, but if you're going by just the original entity of who Michael Myers is, he's honestly the epitome of tragedy, the boogeyman in the shadows, and honestly, in later movies, PTSD, which is why I think he's a much more interesting character to analyze than some of the other ones. But he's a very scary character. The Mummy, more particularly the older movies, although I do like some of the newer interpretations of him, such as with the Brendan Fraser movie, and even to a certain degree, although she needed a lot more depth of character, I did kind of enjoy her in the Mummy reboot. But the one in particular that I'm thinking of is Boris Karloff, the guy who really made the Mummy famous. This is really another example of a great horror character who is not 100% evil, more particularly if you're going with Boris Karloff. He was simply in love with the Princess Anaxinamen. He loved her, she loved him, and they were not bad people. However, with obviously certain religious and cultural reasons, they couldn't be together. He was, a priest. She was, the princess. So they couldn't be together. So eventually, when she did die rather mysteriously, he just wanted to bring her back to life so they could be together. And of course, he was delving into the dark arts of, magic within ancient Egypt, and for that he was punished. He was buried alive. His tongue was cut out. Actually, if you go with the Boris Karloff version, his tongue was not cut out. But now there's a lot of really great things. This is what it's a very romantic horror character. He simply became a villain because of someone that he loved, and eventually the curse wakes him up. Many years later, he roams the earth again, only to try and bring Anaxinamen back to the land of the living through basically this person who is basically a reincarnation of her to a certain degree. But yeah, that's why I really like him. He's he's one of the more romantic horror characters out there. Frankensteins Monster. Now, this is a character who is honestly bathed in tragedy. Now, notice I didn't say Frankenstein, I said Frankensteins Monster. Frankenstein was the scientist, the monster was the monster. More particularly, focusing on Boris Karloff's portrayal of the character, he is really tragic. He was simply built because, well, a man wanted to play God. And eventually, he is created, he is given life, and he doesn't understand his purpose or why he even exists. He doesn't have a soul, and he's simply just walking around like, I really do not understand my purpose of why I am here. I do not need to be here. I belong dead. When you go with The Bride of Frankenstein, he doesn't understand what life is, or what death is for that matter. And he's just simply trying to exist. But whenever anyone sees him, they simply look at him like he's evil, when in reality, he really isn't evil. He is created from evil, but he himself is not evil. One of my favorite moments with this character is in The Bride of Frankenstein, when he is spending time with the blind man. The blind man interacts with him, tries to become friends with him, and they do both become friends because he understands, well, he doesn't know that he's a monster or anything like that, and he just sees him as the tortured soul that he is. And that's the reason why I love the monster so much, is because he's such a misunderstood character. And honestly, there's a lot that you can learn from the character of the monster and apply him to the lessons of real life. Ash Williams. Okay, we're getting a little bit more fun here with characters, and this is the first hero horror character. Ash Williams, portrayed by the great Bruce Campbell, reigns from the Evil Dead series. And he's an incredible, honestly, really funny character and really, really BA. Now, when you go to the first movie, he's not really that interesting or that iconic. He really starts to get more of his Ash personality in Evil Dead 2. That's when a lot of the iconic imagery, one-liners, and other elements of Ash really start to shine forth. And then when Army of Darkness comes around, he's just an incredibly fun character. And he's not necessarily, well, complex. He's simply just, well, he's the epitome of like being a heroic one-liner, badass character. And that's really kind of all he is, but he's so much fun to watch, and he has so many great one-liners. He has a lot of, the Bruce Campbell does an amazing job playing him in general, and I really love him in the TV show, Ash versus the Evil Dead. I think one of the things I love about Ash more in particular is just how much of a selfish character he is, but in the long run, his heart and willingness to help people usually always wins the day. He is a jerk. He really is. But once again, this is a character you can kind of learn a little bit from, because although he's a very lovable jerk and, is always out for himself, he, like I said, he does usually always turn around and try to help a friend. He does eventually try to do what is characterized as right. The Wolfman. Now, this is a character who I honestly have a great love and admiration for a multitude of reasons. One, he's played by Lon Chaney Jr., an incredible, incredible actor, reigning from his father, Lon Chaney, who played Phantom of the Opera, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and so many other incredible, monstrous roles. He was known as the Man of 1,000 Faces. And Lon Chaney Jr., although didn't necessarily reach the fame status of his father, he certainly did put in a lot of incredibly great performances in his time in Hollywood. More particularly with the Wolfman. And the reason why the Wolfman is really high up on this list is because this is a character I honestly really identify with. He is not a villain. He is an incredibly, honestly, very tragic character. One of the reasons why is because the aspect of werewolfism in this movie in particular really does stand for mental health, PTSD, and a lot of other different elements, and how a lot of the things from your past can really, really weigh down on you and eventually just kind of drive you a little bit crazy. And I don't mean in like a Joker kind of way. This character is truly sad. He's tragic, and he doesn't want this curse. I honestly put the aspect of the Wolfman with elements like depression, especially when you watch a lot of the later movies with Lon Chaney Jr. He's just incredibly sad. He doesn't want to live. He doesn't want to do anything with his life because of the fact that he's burdened with this terrible curse of becoming a werewolf every time when the full moon rises. And as I said, that's something that I really identify with in many regards. Not becoming a werewolf, obviously, but in the aspect of depression, which is something I do have, it is something that I find to be a really identifiable character trait. And when I watch him, a lot of the time, I honestly feel a lot of that pain because of the pain and the sorrow that he's dealing with every time, because kind of the same aspect with werewolfism, at least kind of in a manner of speaking, very loosely. Depression is something that, there are some days where life can be incredibly great, everything can be fine, but then once in a while, you will get that full moon, and your depression will hit you like a ton of bricks, and you will just not really know what to do with life. And that's one of the big reasons why I absolutely love the Wolfman. Now, before we get to number one, here are a few honorable mentions that I didn't have on the list. And I assure you, I love all of these characters. And manner of speak, honestly, if I could come up with another top 10 of a top, just something, I would just put in all these characters again, because, I love a lot of these horror characters. But for one reason or another, I just didn't put him in here. There's the creature from the Black Lagoon. There's Chucky. There's Leatherface. Number 1, Jason Voorhees. Is anyone really surprised by this? I mean, okay, so he's not necessarily, at least in my opinion, he's not the best horror character out there, but for me, he's definitely my favorite horror character, for a multitude of reasons. One, he has such an iconic look. I love the whole hockey mask and machete thing. Yeah, his look does change in literally all of the movies. Even if it's sometimes just a slight change or drastic change, whether or not it's an outfit or his hideous look or whatever. But yeah, I just absolutely love Jason Voorhees. It's a very weird thing. It's something that when you look at all the other iconic horror characters, why is Jason Voorhees my favorite? Especially, after the heartfelt thing I was talking about with the Wolfman. Well, like I said, there's a lot of things. One of the things is, for a very simple character, I actually do like his backstory. Basically, he was a deformed child, he was picked on a lot as a kid, and then eventually, after he was picked on to the point where he fell into the river, he couldn't swim. There were 2 counselors who were having premarital sex and weren't paying any attention to any of the kids, and Jason wound up drowning. So after that, his mother, went on basically a killing spree, blaming all of the, all of the young people for their sinful deeds, and, because they weren't paying any attention to Jason when he drowned, and then Jason eventually followed in suit to, come back and basically, drive away and kill anyone who comes anywhere near Crystal Lake. He's the epitome of the urban legend, or like the ghost story from, you would literally sit around a campfire, talk about, some random scary stories, probably ones that you would honestly come up with, and, he sounds like something that you would say around a campfire. A little boy drowned here not so long ago, and then his mother went on a killing spree, and then eventually he came back from the dead, or something like that. It's very interesting, and I love the format of the Friday the 13th series, and I love Jason overall as a character. He is a villainous character, but there is some tragedy to him, just like a lot of the other horror characters, which is why I think he actually fits very well within the modern slasher, as almost like a classic horror character. Like Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger, they are 100% evil. But with some of the other characters, like, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Fly and whatnot, like Jason Voorhees fits into the description of a tragic horror character. Now, afterwards, he's not really tragic, and you can't really identify with him at all. But, before he became the killer, before he became this undead monster or whatever, in some manner of speaking, he is a little bit tragic because, he was bullied, and then eventually he drowned because no one was paying any attention to him because they were off doing bad things. That's kind of what makes him a little bit interesting with his character. Like I said, he's not the most developed or even arguably the most interesting out of all the horror characters out there, but for a slasher, I think out of all of them, he's not only the most iconic to me, in my own opinion, but honestly the only one you can actually identify with compared to Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Leatherface, or literally any slasher. Because most slashers, they're all very one-dimensional, they're evil, they go on, killing sprees just because, something like that. And although a lot of them can be very interesting, Jason Voorhees, although his series isn't the best, I would argue his character is the most interesting compared to all of them. Some of you might disagree with me, and that's okay. But I really do love Jason Voorhees. I mean, there's a reason why, I have almost literally every single NECA figure of him. I have a bunch of I have all of his movies. I backed a bunch of the fan films for him and everything. And so there's a lot of... You guys know. I love me some good old Jason Voorhees. And that's the end of the list. So tell me, guys, who are your favorite horror characters? Make sure that you leave a list of them, or just a few of them, in the comment section below. There are so many incredible horror characters out there that they wouldn't be able to make it into this list. I'll have to do maybe another, maybe more focused list, other than just like all horror characters in general. But yeah, so I'm very interested to see what you guys might have to say for horror characters. Maybe give me some suggestions for maybe another top 10 when it does come to horror characters or something like that. So yeah, I'll be very interested what you guys will have to say in the comment section below. If you're new to the channel, make sure that you subscribe and hit that like button, and also make sure that you hit the bell so that way you guys know when new videos are coming out. And on top of that, make sure you follow us on social media with Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And last but not least, if you guys can, I would greatly appreciate it if you could follow us and support us on Patreon. Anything as little as $1 can go a long way in helping support me and the channel and whatnot. So if you can do that, I would greatly appreciate that. And that's basically it. You guys take care, God bless, and I'll see you guys around. Take care.